Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jelena Trkulja, and I'm delighted to introduce the panelists of this talk, Inventing the Rules, Curating Rubaiya's inaugural edition. Tom Eccles, Ruba Katrib, Rappolt, and Shabbir Hussain Mustafa. And this panel will be moderated by Tirdad Zolghadr, Curator of the Academic Engagement at Mathaf Arab Museum of Modern Art, Doha. Take it away.
Thank you, Jelena. Thank you for having us. Thank you all for joining today. Art fairs are such awkward occasions, but they manage to draw such amazing crowds. And as a curator, I'm always green with envy. It's really great to have you all. Before I introduce our panelists, allow me to introduce the remit of today's panel. So, what does it take to launch a new international quadrennial in an already crowded global art landscape? What is at stake in doing so now? Over the next 45 minutes, Rubaiya's curators will unpack the quadrennial's first edition from its framework to its place within the wider ecosystem of exhibitions worldwide. My name is Tirdad Zolghadr, and as Jelena mentioned, I work at Mathaf as part of the team, and I've curated in biennial settings and published research on the format. And today, apart from looking at the specific content of the upcoming quadrennial, we will also be looking at the biennial tradition and thinking about the format. What can you do with biennials, triennials, quadrennials that you cannot do with other events? I will briefly, very briefly, shamelessly briefly, introduce our panelists because we only have 45 minutes and a lot of ground to cover. So allow me to begin with Ruba Katrib, who is the Chief Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs at MoMA PS1. She was previously Curator at Sculpture Center New York and co-curated Site Santa Fe's Biennial in 2018. To her left, Mark Rappolt is Editor-in-Chief of ArtReview and founder of ArtReview Asia. In terms of recent curating, he co-curated together with Tom Eccles One Tiger or Another right here in Doha at Mathaf. And to his left is Shabbir Hussain Mustafa, who's Chief Curator at the Singapore Art Museum. He curated the Singapore Pavilion at the Venice Biennale of 2015. Last but not least, to my left is Tom Eccles, who is a longtime colleague. It's wonderful to be on stage with you again, Tom. He leads the Center for Curatorial Studies, a curatorial graduate program at Bard College in upstate New York, and also directs the Hessel Museum of Art. Since 2018, he has been part of the public art program of Qatar. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have you. And I will give our panelists the opportunity to speak each in turn a little bit about the upcoming project, and we'll begin with Tom, who will give us a bit of background on how this project came together.
Okay, thank you, Tirdad. I must say, when I worked with Tirdad in 2005, 2006, and probably the last place I would have imagined to meet up with him would be back here in Doha in those times. But now it seems kind of normal that Tirdad would be here. It may still feel a little unnormal for me to be here, but or still here. Yeah, and that span of time is the span of time of this immense growth in arts and culture in Doha and in Qatar more generally. You know, you've seen from the original Mia, you've seen the National Gallery in 6 years ago opening. You've seen Mathaf continually evolve. You now have a school evolved and growing, led by Welsh Shorkey. You have Art Basel here, who 20 years ago would have thought Art Basel would be in Doha. And of course, this has all been driven by the remarkable vision, determination, and tireless efforts of Her Excellency, Sheikh Al Mayasser, and also the team here in Doha has evolved. We have incredible leadership in exhibitions, public art from Sheikh Kareem, and in the Rubaiya, Sheikh Al-Anud Al-Thani, both of whom really are driving this project overall. And we're the curators. And I was asked, I don't know, probably about 5 years ago, I think it was, to lead up an effort to think about what a quadrennial would be here. And my first question was, why me? And I think it was probably because I'd already been doing a lot of the public art here, so it was kind of embedded in engagement, both bringing international artists, but also thinking locally. And I think the question why the Rubaiya now, why a quadrennial now, is really about this kind of double place. How do you kind of encourage a more international dialogue here, but how do you make that impactful locally? And I think my experience over this time, particularly from beginning really with the boycott, this really moment of quite dramatic change in the way the country functioned and thought about itself. And rather than submit to this, it sort of rose up and in an incredible way and kind of grew from that experience and had a sort of inner determination, I think, to create progress in a way that maybe a couple of years before didn't quite exist. And then, of course, you have COVID, another enormous challenge. And out of these kind of embers came a large number of opportunities, ways of thinking, new modes of institutional activity, and certainly a very different place than it was 1 decade ago. And you've also seen the great importance, particularly today, of Qatar's central place in global diplomacy. And that's all happened, as I say, over the past decade. And so the first thing you do is you ask other curators. And it was my pleasure to reach out first to Mark Rappolt, who had spent really much of his life as editor of ArtReview and then ArtReview Asia, really trying to broaden a global perspective on art. Particularly in which we terribly call the Global South sometimes. And Ruba Katrib, a Syrian American curator, who's taken some flack over the years for promoting artists from the Arab world, investigating the effects, particularly of American interventions in the Arab world. And then doing individual retrospective survey shows, individual projects with artists from the Middle East. From there, it was Mark who suggested Shabbir Hussain Mustafa, who, I don't know if he likes me saying this, is, I think of Mustafa as a research curator, which means he asks much harder questions than I do. And as a team, we've then tried to think about what it is, how does one address some of those issues I raised earlier. And the first thing you notice when you come here is you notice this is probably one of the most diverse populations in the world. And so how do you reflect that population in some form or other? And at the other moment, we were thinking, where do you start? So don't start by importing. Everyone's always trying to import things. Let's start with what's already here. And where better to start than the myriad collections of Qatar museums. Just the most unbelievable range, quality, and depth of collections. And in that collection, this is the weirdest thing. It's not really under any category, because you go paintings, you go through sculpture, jewels. They've even got all the movie posters and movie detritus from Star Wars. And then there's the boat, a boat wreckage, the wreckage of a boat called the Chirabon, and fairly recently acquired. And the Chirabon shipwreck went down somewhere between the 9th and 10th century, and it had about 100,000 objects on it, fairly domestic objects, not particularly jewels, but I call it the kind of IKEA shipment of the 9th century, and pots and pans, essentially. And, but what's important about it is that it contains proof positive the Maritime Silk Road. And the Maritime Silk Road goes from Mesopotamia, really the Caucasus actually, all the way through Mesopotamia, all the way down to where the ship ultimately sank in Cirebon in Indonesia. It was probably in China before. It's a little unknown, but some of the objects suggest China. And then you look at it and you lay that on top of a map and you say, it matches almost perfectly the population of Qatar today, from Bangladesh, from India, from Pakistan, to Southeast Asia, the Philippines, to Indonesia. And then those trade routes, you start to think about those trade routes, and it was Mustafa who suggested we read a rather dry book called, rather lengthy dry book called Unruly Waters by Sunil Amrith, which is an exploration of how the oceans, water, and our relationship to the weather, particularly the monsoons, have shaped our lives, and how we also shape water and nature itself. And so bringing those forces together, that then gave us a roadmap to where we'd look in terms of developing an artist list for this project. And so maybe I pass to Ruba to take over from there.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So Tom gave a really good framework. I'll just give some more detail maybe to help ground the conversation. This exhibition, as Tom mentioned, we've been working on it for many years, and it's been a little stop and start. Also, there was the World Cup. You forgot to mention, many things that have happened here that have really positioned Qatar in, I think, perfectly to launch something like the Rubaiya in November, which is when it will happen. And we have our exhibition Unruly Waters, but there's also many things happening in the country during this time. And many of our esteemed colleagues have spoken about this over the week. And this show is over 50 artists right now. The majority of the show is made up of new commissions. When we talk about the opportunity of what a show like this can do, I think that's really important to underscore, which is, we're helping make new art, new work that will be shown here, but will also go out in the world and have a long-lasting impact. So I'm quite excited about that. There's artists from all around Asia very broadly, and of course the Arab world, and I think there's also a really exciting generation of artists from the Arab world who are a part of the show, particularly women artists. I'm also, I think there's some statements we're making within the show that are outside of just the themes that we're dealing with, and of course the themes are interesting, but it's also kind of abstract right now, and the artists are also responding to these themes. So they will be, bringing the narrative of the show to fruition through their research, through the development of their works, and through the exhibition and the dialogue between the works that you will see when you come here in November. We will expect you all to come back if you're not from here. And then I think it's also just a really great opportunity to have this kind of conversation here. And the show is at El Rawak, so it's actually like not our exhibition is in one space. And so a lot of artists are also, dealing with the site. And I think this museum, if you haven't visited, it's the IMP show is on right now. And I think it's a beautiful space for us to put on this kind of scale of exhibition. So I'll pass it on to Mark add more, because I think we can have questions from Tirdad too to flesh out some more of the context around this exhibition and around this moment here in Doha.
Thanks, Ruba. I think maybe to add the kind of promised unruly element to this, and perhaps to address the title a little bit about what rules do we invent. As Tom's sort of alluded to, we started by shamelessly exploiting the work of others. So first of all, our colleagues in Qatar museums who built this infrastructure that we're using, and a history of exhibition making that I think has been extremely influential in all the things we've done, and we've learned a lot by working with other people. And I think for us it's very important to acknowledge that exhibitions like this one don't just come pop out of nowhere, but they're built on the foundations and conversations we've had over the years. Secondly, as Tom mentioned, we've taken the title from a historian called Sunil Amrith. And we're not illustrating his book, but we are working with him to expand the kind of thesis he set out. We've also worked with the Doha Institute on a major conference about water and aesthetics and epistemologies, which threw up all kinds of ways of thinking through the exhibition that we wouldn't have come up with as curators from an artistic background. So we had historians talking about the trade routes and the complications of that, linguists talking about the spread of Arabic and how there are all these fusion languages across the kind of rough territory we're mapping out. So I think they all brought new ways of thinking about it, and ways that came from outside of art and outside of conventional thinking about art, but very much came from here. And the conference was a mix of established academics who were sort of being attacked by young emerging academics. So we kind of liked that kind of unruly spirit too. And to add what Tom said about, we've also been working a lot with the archaeologists on the materials from the shipwreck Tom was talking about. And I think what's interesting to us about this moment of history as a site to build an exhibition is that all these objects are on one ship, but there's no proof the ship went anywhere. It could have brought all of them from vessels passing by, never traveled anywhere along the maritime Silk Road, yet it speaks to its existence. And I think the exhibition is very much founded on these moments that are one thing and another, fact and fiction, speculation, here and not here. And I think at that point I can hand it over to Mustafa.
Thank you, Mark. I just wanted to kind of begin also with a reference to something that Sunil Amrith alludes to and builds on in the book. Is we often think that the climate, the weather, the tides have shaped us. But there's also something else that he says, that we've also shaped the climate and the weather and the tides, right? And this is sort of seems like a very simple and obvious point in today's context, especially as we think about infrastructures through kind of aesthetic modes. But one thing that we are also trying to very carefully track through the extensive commissions and the conversations that are accompanying this project, which have been multi-year, is also the kind of artistic intelligence that can be brought to bear upon a lot of the kind of critical questions that we are all grappling with, despite borders and boundaries. And in a sense, I think the exhibition, Unruly Waters, is also attempting to say that geography, often imagined as borders and boundaries, is precisely not that. And a lot of the artistic perspectives, the 50 or so, as Ruba has mentioned, are really kind of thinking this through together, but also with us. And one kind of approach that we are also trying to position through these conversations is the idea of the polyvocal. So what does it mean to have differences in opinion, but also then sit alongside each other and be open to that conversation, right? And I think the exhibition will try to get at that. And I think amongst us here, we have degrees of diversity, if I may call it that. And I think that's kind of been, in a sense, the greatest strength and also a point of courage to be able to speak to these diverse geographies that the exhibition also attempts to get at, right? because often it's one thing to say an exhibition is doing it, and then it's another thing to actually do it in practice. And this is sort of the challenge, I guess, that we've taken on, not just by ourselves, but also with the artists and also all the incredible colleagues at Qatar Museums who are really, with us through this journey. So just to say that the last 4 to 5 years, I think, as Tom alluded to, have been really critical in reaching out and convening a sort of a field of thinking, if not exhibition making per se, at least not yet, right? Come November, we'll get to that stage. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think you've answered already to a degree one of the questions I raised in my introduction. What can you do with a quadrennial that you cannot do with other formats? There's time and space for extensive research and also an international platform to give this a decent amount of exposure. And biennials and these large-scale events can be wonderful introductions to very complex matter, historiographic and otherwise. But can I raise a question regarding what Tom in the beginning called local impact, which is a really tough nut to crack. It's a real challenge for curators, also in a biennial format, or perhaps especially. I really appreciated the way Mark was describing all these shoulders that you're standing on, all these infrastructures, all this effort, all this labor that came before you. Which foundations do you think you can leave behind with all this blood, sweat, and tears that you're investing in your project? It's a very hard part of the equation is to make sure that it lingers, that it has an impact that transcends the finissage. Is there, maybe you could talk about the commissioning process, maybe that is feeding into this kind of long-term thinking.
I think it really is through working with the artists, because to your point, this commissioning process is quite involved. And I think, this is a really big contemporary art show with new artworks and a lot of open questions. So it's not like an exhibition where we have the set checklist of objects we're borrowing from X, Y, and Z. So it's really developing an exhibition out of these conversations, and the team here is integral to that and very involved in that. And I think artists have been spending time here as well. So there's also residencies. So it's really, there's an artist here right now. There's a number of artists who've come and will be coming to spend time to make their works. And they're not necessarily, helicoptering in to make work about Qatar, but they're really, connecting with a whole range of people and thinking about what to make and working on their work here. And making those kinds of long-term relationships and connections that I think will be essential. And it really is about those relationships, because over the years that we've been working on this, we're developing relationships along the way that we hope will continue. And I think the artists will as well. So it's, over 50 plus us four and whoever else, really investing here and spending a lot of time here.
I think also, two things. One, it's interesting that particularly in Doha, there are these different artistic communities, the literary community, a very strong film community, growing artist community, and we're really trying to think that the exhibition, the programs around the exhibition will try to bring some of those together, but also community-specific events. I think part of the job of a first exhibition type is capacity building institutionally. We're doing a quadrennial is very, very different from doing a Dan Flavin exhibition, right? Don't I know it? And doing a Dan Flavin exhibition with someone in Singapore and you're in New York, it's quite a challenge. The third thing is very important. I think we're very conscious of thinking through how does one build audiences. I know QM is very, very conscious of this, and that is a big challenge, right? To get people to come to museums who've never come to museums, and and so people always say, "Oh, bring the children," and often the challenge is getting the parents. And we've thought this through, you know, like we like one, what's the venue? So you have this amazing, you know, MIA, the Museum of Islamic Art Park. For me, it's just the most incredible place. I go there all times of the day, early morning and late evenings. But on Thursday night, it is rocking, and it is the most democratic space, in the most generous space, and people of all backgrounds are here. If you go down to the Dows, you've got migrant workers, primarily men, renting a boat to dance on for half an hour. You've got families going through the park. You've got children playing, shouldn't be playing soccer, but they do. And so to have the exhibition right on the park, and that is the Al Rawak building has just been restored, renovated, and repurposed by Rem Koolhaas and OMA. To have that location was vital because it has a very clear connection, an opening place to a broader public. And we just installed, you know, the project itself is a journey, as Mark said. We've had conferences, collaborations, workshops, but also in terms of the exhibition we just opened, which many of you may have come to, Rikrit Tiravanij's pavilion, bread-making pavilion, No Bread, No Ashes, that opened. And in that, that came about through really just walking around the streets of Doha going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And seeing all these different forms of bread being made, some just literally in a little crevice in a wall, others rather more grand, and realizing that bread is in fact very identity specific, but very universal. And so we have these different forms of ovens in the pavilion with different people coming, and ultimately we hope the public can utilize these ovens to break their own bread. So on a taboon or making a tandoor or what have you. The other thing is, and after this talk, please join us with the general public, because every Friday we have free bread being baked on the site with other culinary events happening too. So one of the ways in which you attract people, it's a bit like if you're selling a house, you should bake some bread in the oven beforehand. But the smell of the bread wafts over the whole park. And so it's been very successful over the last few months, probably more successful than we thought, in bringing a lot of people who never came to that part of the park, never saw that there was a museum there, and it's free. So I think you've got to kind of, so trying to think carefully what, quote it a bit corny, what are the ingredients that can also transform the image of museums and exhibitions and who they're for in the city.
I think maybe in a slightly ironic way, what Tom and Ruben's saying is that one of the ways to do something here is to do nothing. In the sense that you can go to Mia Park, you hear different languages, different people all around, which is reflected in the exhibition itself. So we haven't tried necessarily to invent loads of new things, but have accepted a lot of what's here and maybe amplified it, you know, up to 11 within the context of the show and the programs. And I think that's been one of the important things for us as we've done this project.
Now, I just wanted to make a similar point by saying that the local is not necessarily always what is already there. The local is also from where things are brought in, right? So a lot of the artists that we are working with, they are highly kind of rooted in their own contexts, right? And those contexts do speak to this kind of zone as well, partly because of how diverse Doha is, right, in many ways. And so I think it's also about linking these dialogues and not necessarily just creating something anew, right? And this is sort of the curating, if you may call it. Yeah.
I think also what was important was, you know, people say, well, how does it reflect the region, right? That immediately comes up. And so then the question is, what's the region, right? And it's not a given. In fact, I think the theme of the show is that regions are kind of are somewhat of a kind of artificial political construct. We decided very strongly that we weren't going to make this a kind of Western quadrennial in Doha. It'd be absurd. In fact, there are only two artists from what I would call the West, the United States, and they're indigenous American artists, one of whom, remarkably, is Egyptian indigenous American. So I think that's also that's quite a bold statement in and of itself. I think it also gives a very strong statement about what's really interesting in art today. And I think that's also a signal for people as to where we all should be looking, where the heart of quite a dynamic discourse is happening today.
Could I ask a question about the biennial tradition and how you would situate yourselves within that? I mean, biennials for the longest time had enjoyed the reputation of being very privileged spaces for political solidarity and dialogue and, you know, serious investment, commitment to certain causes. And that has, I mean, some would argue that has been lost along the way, and biennials reinvented themselves along new lines. It's no longer, you know, the kind of platform that the Baghdad biennial was in the 70s, for example, here in this region. It's a different kind of conversation. I mean, we know that art fairs have reinvented themselves to be, you know, these platforms for discourse. We are an example thereof. How do you think biennales, or let me phrase this question differently. When I was last involved in curating a biennial, we would look at other models and say, we're not doing that, for God's sake. Like, we're not going there. We're going to really do things differently. Can I ask you to situate yourself within that conversation? Are there certain models that you refer to that are important to you, or the other way around?
I mean, I think we all have probably different opinions on this. Also, the quadrennial, biennial, triennial format, you know, there's a collective effort, and just to note that we all have shared perspectives, but also differing perspectives, and that I think is what makes it interesting and brings something. We each bring something to the table. I think it's really, you know, such a changing moment, honestly, within the landscape of these kinds of events and exhibition formats, and so, like, personally, I just think it's time to really move forward and you know, look at what else is happening. But this is maybe won't feel completely new, but I think it is a new opportunity. And I think with the Rubaiya structure, it's very interesting because it's not just like, you know, the biennial, the show, the authorship of the show is like taking place all over the city, but really every institution is responding in some way. So it's really more of almost like a festival structure with this lead show at the heart of it. And so there's many reasons to come here. There's many things to experience. So it's not just focused on, you know, our exhibition solely. But I think, you know, I think what truly is so unique about this is the opportunity to, you know, bring a certain cohort of artists together to make a statement in a cohesive space as well, because it isn't so distributed across the city, the unruly waters part at least. So you really have artists in direct dialogue with one another. So it's a little bit almost more like a huge museum show, as well as being, you know, a quadrennial level exhibition because of the kind of lead time and production support that we're offering. So it's sort of a little bit of a hybrid, or a bit of many things at once, and I think there's something really exciting about that and new.
And I think maybe to amplify what Ruba was already saying, I mean, the invitation for us to come and do something on this scale here is a generous one. And I think what we've tried to do is replicate the generosity that we've received with everything else around us, whether it's the festival structure with other people doing exhibitions, fellow travelers, and other departments and other disciplines. I think we've really wanted to create a space in which everyone can be a part of it and not feel that we're the authors and they're following the script, but to make it as open as we could possibly make it. And I think that's very important to how we try to work. Maybe it's a condition of 4 people working together too, because you have to be, as Ruba said, you have to accommodate opinions that might not be your own and you might violently disagree with.
Treading on eggshells there.
But I think also there's another aspect to it that, you know, when it says different, you know, a lot of so-called global events have not been global at all, you know? A lot of biennials, global biennials, have actually been extremely exclusionary and extremely centered on certain places. And often with resources provided from galleries from New York and London and elsewhere. We've been very, very careful that everybody gets equal resources. You know, it's a case, for example, that, you know, artists in, you know, Southeast Asia are often very underfunded compared to, you know, artists in New York, purely based on the geographical economies and visibilities. And you know, so I think this is it is going to be an important moment. I hope it may sound rather pretentious and naive, but it is a kind of recentering of the globe, or certainly a moment of recentering the globe. And you know, from my perspective, the most enjoyable part, most fundamentally shifting part for me has been actually my entire perspective on the history of the world. You know, actually learning from being here, and also like Qatar has sort of become a center, and then, you know, from Qatar to Singapore, you realize that actually that's the midpoint, and then you realize the histories of trade, of migration, are quite different from the ones certainly someone like I would have learned in school, and then also be taught today by Western media. So I think there's a kind of, and then even still on the global art stage, so to speak, those exclusions, those knowledges, those inherited prejudices still exist, very much today.
Just a quick point on this, to say that one of the things that the Chirabon Rec kind of tells us is that modernity has always been a distributed affair, right? It's just that because of certain hierarchies that are built either through the way capital moves or the way the art world moves and so on and so forth, we've come to assume that these hierarchies are somehow normal. With this project, I don't think we are trying to say that, oh, we wish to exclude per se. All we're trying to say is that we want to try and look and build other bases outside of the territorial West, so to speak. And I think that's important. It's actually the call of the moment, if I may even be so bold enough to put forward. Yeah.
May I ask you in the time that's remaining to give us just a slightly better peek under the hood and understand the content, just with a little more. You've given us a very kind of a meta account of your approach, and I'm wondering if I could just push you a little further. The water leitmotif is very generous. It can go in many different directions. And this image of the shipwreck is also extremely powerful and seductive. But it draws you in the direction of something historiographic, something about the histories of trade, the diversity which you were eloquently pointing out in Qatar, which is reflected in that story, modernity as a redistributive affair. But water also raises, you know, connotations that are quite painful nowadays: climate collapse, water wars, etc. Are you being diplomatic by treading historiographic ground?
Can we talk about some of the projects?
I just want to note that we have announced a small group of artists already. So there are some names out there of artists that might bring some specificity to the conversation, and we'll announce the rest of them later. So it's it's not all out there. But I think, you know, a lot of the artists are responding to these themes, so they are thinking about approaching the subject from many different angles, but also thinking about, you know, the sort of the lack of water, let's say, or scarcity, dryness. So it's the foil. You know, there's a lot of foils and dichotomies and sort of tensions that are arising within the show. So it's not one message about anything really. It's actually there's some literal material within the exhibition, but also a lot of metaphorical, and then you know, works that are also speculative and thinking about the future. So something that I found quite interesting in a show that has historic material as a grounding, as an anchor with the Chirabon Rec, is how much artists are thinking of and projecting into the possible future. So thinking about modes of transport, vehicles, thinking about scarcity, dryness, amongst abundance and the destructive effects of water. So there's a lot of and the necessities of water as well. So there's a lot of tensions within the show, but it's also quite future-oriented too, and in playful ways as well. So it's not a there's some didactic elements, but I think that a lot of artists are exploring and playing and pushing and speculating and coming up with, I think, quite inventive ways of addressing these questions.
I mean, I think broadly speaking, in the exhibition, water is a subject, not an object. And I think there's some interesting entanglements between the past, the present, and the future, as Ruba's alluded to. So, for instance, we have a ship that sunk, that failed miserably to do what it was supposed to do, and we have it because it was, you know, so bad in some ways. But then we look to the present day and how climate's affecting people in different ways. People are drowned on land as much as they're drowned at sea, and what are we doing about that? And those kind of issues come through very strongly in a kind of tangled ball, really, within the show. And I guess there's a sense of historic repetition that runs through a lot of the work, that these things appear in different ways at different times, and will appear in different ways at different times in the future. So I think it sort of goes in those cycles in a way.
Speaking about specificities, the word Cirebon keeps coming up. And Cirebon is a city in East Java, Indonesia, and the wreck, the site of its discovery, is actually quite far away from Cirebon, right? And that in itself is a great question. Why Cirebon then? Why not another adjacent location? But we have an artist who's also announced, Ade Darmawan, who is very much looking at the city of Cirebon, what's actually still happening there. And one of the things that you encounter the moment you go to Cirebon is glass painting, an incredible tradition that not only is thriving, but also a very major site of innovation. So I think to also look at different, and this is the kind of material intelligence that I was speaking about earlier, that the show tries to bring out, to say that life and the aesthetic spirit and imagination thrive in all these incredible parts of the world, and how can we get them to speak to one another without necessarily agreeing per se, right? Because as we know, maybe we don't agree on a lot of things here as well, but we accommodate and we work through these difficult questions. So it's sort of built through very specific, kind of highly localized understandings of what it means to be making art today, or what contemporary practice means, by really gathering various and different modes of working. Yeah.
And you know, one of the things I found interesting in the process with talking to artists, it spurred them trying to do projects that they'd never really been able to do, or like take on journeys, collaborate in new ways. For example, Bani Abidi, a filmmaker from Pakistan, she's collaborating with an Indian filmmaker who she can't just cross the border to meet. So that the film she's going to make is going to be her on a boat going towards India, and her collaborator coming from India across the sea, and they meet at the border. So again, like a lot of the projects kind of engage this notion of the water, but it becomes a foil for something else. Just got to warn you, if you're ever thinking of going to Chirabon, maybe do. Mark and I went, I'd do a little research first.
Do you want to elaborate?
I don't think not a lot happened since the wreck went down. But,
Thank you for your generous answers. I know that the questions I've been asking are real challenges, and curators often get defensive when you try to push them on them. The question of accounting for painful, ongoing political realities it's a lose-lose situation. If you don't address them, that's a huge loss. If you do, it's very difficult to respond to things as they're happening in the moment, and also the matter of leaving behind foundations is a really enormous challenge for every curator who's invited to a new context. And I'm thankful for your very unpretentious and refreshing answers. I've already overdrawn by 17 seconds. We actually had the plan to break the rules and hand out the mic and see if there are questions from the audience, but I think that since we've run out of time, I can only encourage you to come to the fore after I've wrapped up here. Thank you all for coming once again. Thank you to the panelists, and have a great afternoon.
thank you, Tirdad.
Thank
you. Thank you. Thank you, Mustafa. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ruba, Tom, and Tirdad for such an inspiring conversation. We can't wait to see the quadrennial come to life in November. I hope many of you will get to see it. And I also, on behalf of Art Basel, want to thank you all for coming in such incredible numbers for this inaugural edition of our Art Basel conversation here in Qatar. We'll be back in 2027, and thank you again. Bye.